TJ Hockenson says all the right things when he's asked about being in a contract year at OTAs, but we all know something's got to give here. So, what exactly is going to happen with TJ Hockenson? Let's try to figure it out on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You like that on 3, 1, 2, 3, you like it!
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I am your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, each and every day. You can find this show wherever you find your favorite podcasts, whether it is YouTube or anywhere you listen to audio podcasts. You can also find it on Amazon Fire or Roku. Just download the Locked On Minnesota Sports app. And a special shout out to my hashtag everydayers. Thank you so much for those of you who do listen to this show every single day. It means the world to me. Today's going to be a TJ Hockenson one. After trading for TJ Hockenson, second round pick, you hope you get more than a year and a half out of that. Vikings trying to extend him. Obviously, that negotiation is going on, but TJ Hockenson is entering a contract year. He was asked about this at OTAs, and he essentially says it is what it is, right? I'm not focusing on that, says all the right things. You know, I want to stay here for a long time, blah, 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 all of that good stuff. Doesn't give us a lot of information on where the Vikings are at there, where the two sides are in terms of that. However, we do know, I believe it's Darren Wolfson has already reported, he reported this months ago, that an extension for TJ Hockenson is something that the Vikings are interested in. So here is the question and how it works. How does this extension look, right? What does it look like on the cap potentially? What are the options here? And I think there are a few options. Also, what does his role on the team look like? They have Josh Oliver now. They've got other guys, Johnny Munt, Nick Muse and stuff. How many tight ends feel like it's going to be more of an emphasis this year? And so how does that manifest itself? And then, of course, this is May. We're doing the Everyman series. So a little bit of Everyman stuff on TJ Hockenson at the end of the show as well. But first, let me just get into the salary cap stuff, because the TJ Hockenson extension is part, I think, one of the biggest offseason storylines we're looking at right now. We are in extension season, I think. Free agency over, draft over, Zadarius Smith traded. We'll see maybe what happens with Dalvin Cook. That's something, but that other than that, we're watching for extensions, right? And with the Zadarius Smith trade, which I think is probably the biggest cap related loss of the offseason, I feel like, it's probably Adam Thielen, honestly. And then, Eric Kendricks as well. Those three guys, that's a big hit to your roster. That's the cost. The benefit of losing all those guys is giving you flexibility in these kinds of situations. If the Vikings wanted to, they could sign TJ Hockenson to an extension that does not adjust his current cap number. And honestly, that's not even that bad of an idea. They don't need the extension to move his salary cap number down. That helps in a flexibility way. Now, is that worth getting rid of a player? I probably disagree with the Vikings on that, but that's neither here nor there. But, a lot of times with extensions of a player on a fifth-year option, let's say for whatever reason, Justin Jefferson doesn't get an extension this year and you're negotiating it with him next year, and he's got a $19 million cap hit, and let's say the Vikings find a way to get super cap strapped, which I don't know how they do that without getting Justin Jefferson extended or whatever, but let's just say all of that happens. I don't know. They signed Kirk Cousins to $50 million a year or something. And then they need to get Jefferson's cap hit down via that extension. So they signed him to that extension. They convert a whole bunch of that $19 million, that fifth-year option, to a signing bonus. And now you have less flexibility in the event that you want to, say, Justin Jefferson asks for a trade in 2026 or something like that. You don't have that flexibility. Now, with some situations, say Brian O'Neill, you're not really worried about that. Brian O'Neill is happy where he is. He's paid well. that's all going to work out. You can restructure that contract and double down even further into it. It gets even harder to get rid of. But if you're not planning to get rid of him, then who cares, right? Don't mind putting a ring on a girl you like, right? But what's nice is that you don't have to do that. Now, Kwesi's talked a ton about how he values flexibility. So let's say you don't give TJ Hockenson any signing bonus. Instead, I'm sure there is some amount that Hockenson wants that he wants to be guaranteed. Hey, there, you cannot take this money away from me. You can trade it to me and someone else pays it, or you can pay it, but whatever, I'm getting my money. That contract value is probably going to end up somewhere. I would not be shocked to see it go north of 15 mil a year in terms of like average annual value. Obviously, the contract structure is going to have a lot more influence on like the actual impact it has on the Vikings. But if you're just looking for an amount, 15 would be my guess. I'm mostly stealing that from Brad Spielberger, which is where I steal most of my contract guesses from. He's a lot better at it than I am, but that's that. And I would guess, I don't know, 3-year deal, maybe 4-year deal, something like that. So you call it 4 years, 60, maybe that feels about right. And then however much of that is guaranteed, just give it in guaranteed salary. Whereas in a situation where you need to get that $9 million hit down, you need to convert some of that to signing bonus. You need a bunch of his money to be given in a signing bonus. And now there's like dead cap that happens if you have, for whatever reason, the desire to get rid of him. I think that mechanism is okay to have, by the way. I mean, you shouldn't be wishy-washy about this, right? If you're extending a player, you should want to keep him. And if you're not extending him, then you don't want to keep him, right? And changing your mind about that a whole bunch, there's a big punish for it, and I think that's appropriate. So that's roughly what I feel like. It can be like this really straightforward contract if the Vikings want, and they can do other kinds of creative stuff if they want to give themselves options. But straightforward salary, however much of it needs to be guaranteed, is kind of the most flexible way. Like just straight up salary, just base salary, not unguaranteed, is the most flexible way to pay a player. You can promise the world to a player in unguaranteed base salary and never pay it out, or maybe you do, or maybe you restructure it, or maybe you trade it but take on some of it to get better draft capital. Like you could do whatever with that, right? Versus stuff like roster bonuses and options, sort of incentives and all of that other kind of wacky stuff convey a certain uncertainty. But we're not uncertain about TJ Hockenson in any way, shape, or form. So we don't need to do that. Just pay the dude the money and probably escalate it a little bit. So what I think might happen would be you keep the $9 million price tag in 2023 as is, because they've made cap space elsewise. They don't need to do it that way. Then you maybe expand it a little bit to 14-ish next year, and then the last 2 years of the deal will be a little bit more inflated, but they'll be further down the road. You'll have a lot of ability to restructure those years later because you haven't guaranteed anything. Or what you could do is you could actually accelerate it a lot faster, and you could give TJ Hockenson even more money this year. You could do a straight up 15, 15, 15, 15. The Vikings can afford to do it. They've got like 11 million in cap space right now. That figures to go up, assuming Dalvin Cook is either cut or traded. So you could just add like 3 mil to TJ Hockenson right now and say, all right, yeah, congratulations, you did it. Here you go, extension, we love you, have a little more money, right? I'm sure that's great. And then go, 15, 15, 18 or something like that. So 12, 15, 15, 18 in over 4 years. So you could do it that way. And then you don't have this crazy bill backloading the contract to come due. I don't know if front loading it is all of that good of an idea, because there are other extensions that need to get done and stuff too. But I wouldn't be surprised to see the contract have just like a more even structure. I'm super curious to see what kind of contract comes in, if one does at all. But regardless of that, I think the more important question is, what is the point of TJ Hockenson right now? The Vikings love him. I love him. But what does he do? And where is the Vikings offense headed? They've got Josh Oliver. How do we make sense of all this? And then, of course, the Everyman stuff is coming up as well. But before I get into that, let me tell you about America's #1 sports book. It is FanDuel. FanDuel is a great place to go to bet on all of the goings-on. It is quite a time for sports right now, that late May playoff hockey. It was the Panthers just went to the Stanley Cup on a sweep. Incredible. The basketball playoffs are now getting to their finals. And you can gamble on all of that stuff at FanDuel. You can even bet on like future Vikings games. I recommend waiting before doing this, but if you want to get the Vikings at -6.5 against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, that's a pretty big spread. You can do that. You can get, or if you want to do a nice emotional hedge and say, hey, if the Vikings come out flat, I can at least get the Bucks at +220. I won't tell. You can do all that stuff at FanDuel. If you've never gambled with FanDuel before, no big deal. Just go to FanDuel.com/lockedon and sign up there, and you can get a no-sweat first bet, up to $1,000 back in bonus bets if you whiff on the first one. The app is safe, secure, and easy to use, and it pays out instantly. Once again, that is FanDuel.com/lockedon to get that no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets back at FanDuel. Make every moment more. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, each and every day. I love it. If you want some more Vikings content today and you haven't already, go check out my Patreon page, patreon.com/LukeBraunNFL. I have in-depth breakdowns on Jaron Hall, Jordan Addison, Mekhi Blackman, now Dwayne McBride. You can go watch all of them. I've got a couple on Addison, actually. And I would appreciate it if you go and checked those out. You don't have to sign up for any of them, but I would appreciate it anyways. So, okay, X's and O's. A huge difference, I think, between the usage of Hockenson last year and the usage of Hockenson this year, now that they have Jordan Addison, to kind of parse all of that out. Okay, they picked a wide receiver. They replaced Adam Thielen, so they still have a 1-2-3 punch at wide receiver, but now they've got this Josh Oliver thing. How does this all play out? And of course, it's going to play out with everybody eating into each other's snap counts and stuff. And so if all you ever parse this through is snap counts, you're going to be like really confused. But here is... let me try to make sense of it through a different lens to try to like help you out. The identity of the Vikings last year was run basically through outside zone weak. A lot of times it was to Christian Darrisaw. It was outside zone weak Christian Darrisaw. 71 outside zone weak, right? Because Darrisaw is really, really good at everything, and running behind him was a good idea, right? So outside zone weak, it is incredibly commonplace in everybody's playbook, and it's just a matter of like who bases out of it and who uses it more like a subversion. But essentially the idea is in the NFL, the most common front that you will see is an over front. And that's a 4-3 front, so 4 down linemen. You got your edges on the outside, and then you have your nose tackle and your 3 tech, right? And in an over front, the 3 tech is on the strong side, and it's like over, and then in an under front, the 3 tech is on the weak side, so it feels like it's kind of shifting away from the strength of the formation, right? It feels like you're kind of cutting under it. That's how I remember it visually. It looks like, but it's where the 3 tech is. If he's on the strong side, it's an over. Weak side, it's an under. Over is the most common front in the NFL. And running weak side against an over front is really good because they put their 3 tech on now the back side of the run. And so there is this really big bubble, this big gap between the nose tackle, the 1 technique, who's between the center and the weak side guard, and the next guy over is all the way on the outside of the tackle, right? So you've got somebody in the A gap and then somebody all the way out in the C gap. And so the B gap is uncovered. You want to run toward that one. That's outside zone weak, the point of outside zone weak, I guess. And the Vikings had some success doing that. But it got a little samey and it got a little bit easier to defend as the season went on, right? Because they didn't have, they had like some subversions on it, but they had a fairly simplistic run game that was mostly there to set up play action and not really there to like be part of the offense like a normal NFL offense would. It's kind of the test case of, what if we only passed all the time? And hey, offense produced very well. So, there's an argument there. But it got a little bit samey, and the run game itself was extraordinarily inefficient. Kevin O'Connell wants to fix that. So I think they're going to run a lot more outside zone strong instead. That is the key difference. Outside zone weak versus outside zone strong. You're not changing the entire world here. You're just going to kind of run it to the other side. Now, the thing about outside zone weak is that puts the world on the tackle's shoulders. The tackle's going to be the lead blocker. Sometimes they did outside zone weak with a CJ Ham with a lead blocker or a wide receiver coming over in jet motion and stuff. They used a lot of fake jet motion to try to influence defenders, but teams kind of catch on to that and figure out how to adjust their run fits so that they can be right whether or not it's a real jet sweep and now suddenly the fake doesn't do what you hope it does, other than have, your lead blocker be like Adam Thielen, when that lead blocker could be TJ Hockenson or CJ Ham or Josh Oliver or somebody a little beefier, right? So hopefully that, that also takes a lot of the blocking responsibility away from somebody like Jordan Addison, who's not as good at it. But running outside zone strong, especially out of 12 and 11 personnel, which is like the Kyle Shanahan way, which I've been kind of guessing that that's what the Vikings will do. I'm curious to see when I get to camp if I'm right about that. Where it depends on the way the defense sets up, and it's probably a whole podcast, probably a Patreon post, honestly, because it's too visual for a podcast. But depending on the way the defense sets up, you would have, say you've got, TJ Hockenson on one side, on the play side where the run is going. And then you have Josh Oliver on the backside of the run. Josh Oliver would motion across the formation. And then you would have two lead blockers. You'd have two tight ends. You'd hand the ball off and run zone that way. And it makes everybody's job a little bit easier. It asks a little bit less of the tackles, which we have two very good tackles, although I don't know what Brian O'Neill's health. Is he going to be there? We'll see, right? So you might have to deal with like Blake Brandel a little bit. And it asks a little bit more of the tight ends in blocking, but it doesn't ask as much of them as you were asking of the tackles in the first place. Put it this way. Let's take a defensive end that's lined up in your normal 5 technique, like where a defensive end would line up, right? Think where Everson Griffin would be, right outside the tackle like that, right? In outside zone, the tackle is just responsible for that guy, right? Christian Darrisaw on their edge rusher, mano-a-mano, see if he can win. Christian Darrisaw did great, and the Vikings are not going to stop running this by any stretch of the imagination. That's still part of it. But if you think about it with the tight end over there, now there's a defensive end between the tight end and the tackle, or maybe he's lining up outside the tackle, kind of either way. The tackle is now protected by a tight end, and if there's two tight ends over there, or a tight end and a running back, or if you run this out of 11 personnel, it's a tight end and you motion KJ Osborne over or Jefferson or somebody like that and run behind that, you're sort of splitting the workload a little bit more. The tackle gets a piece of that edge rusher, probably ends up finishing the block, but he's going to get chipped and doubled by that tight end who's now working his way up to a linebacker. There's a few more moving parts. And a lot of times with using that motion, Kyle Shanahan's famous for using all that motion. A lot of times with that motion, you take a safety or something from one side of the formation and who will come over with, let's say you take KJ Osborne and you're going to do a fake jet motion type thing, but then he turns into the lead blocker, but it's a strong side run. So you also have TJ Hockenson over there, or shoot, it could be Josh Oliver too, but it's also TJ Hockenson over there. If you take KJ Osborne and bring him over, a strong safety probably is coming over, and that strong safety might be the unchained player, an unblocked. We don't care about him. Just let him come over. If he makes the play, bless him. You can essentially say, if we ignore that strong safety and we just count KJ Osborne as an extra guy and say, look, we got an extra guy in the run, gives us our numbers advantage the way that we want it. Now it becomes the running back versus unblocked strong safety, assuming that now that we're +1, we can block it up. Now that strong safety has to come all the way across the field, motion, and come down and make the tackle on our guy. That's like a really hard thing to do, and especially a really hard thing to do consistently. So we're just going to run that a whole bunch and make that safety do it. And if they don't start, and if we start motioning guys and they stop reacting or they start shifting it a different way to go up against the run game, now we can hit them with a pass rep. And that is only the run game thing. I don't really have enough time to get to the passing game factor of TJ Hockenson, but suffice to say, it'll be very similar to what he did last year, where he kind of became wide receiver 2 for us. So how about wide receiver 2 that also gives you the ability to kind of solve some of the run game problems and inefficiencies? Yeah, pay that dude. But hey, here on Locked On Vikings, we like to think of these guys as more than fantasy football players and, cap hits with yardage totals. So next up, we're going to do the Everyman series on TJ Hockenson. I cannot often say that I have a lot in common with an NFL player, but I can at least say I have this in common with TJ Hockenson. We are both little brothers. I am 4 years younger than my sister. He is 11 years younger than his next oldest. He has a younger sister as well, 15 and 11 years younger than his two older brothers. And I think when you grow up as a little brother, there's a little bit of little brother syndrome. I speak from a little bit from experience here, and I have a feeling that TJ Hockenson can sympathize. You get a little bit obsessed with proving yourself, you know? Look, the older boys are playing ball in the backyard. TJ Hockenson grew up in one of those neighborhoods where all of the houses kind of backyards like all meld into each other and nobody had a fence. So it was all just like one big space for all the kids to play around in. And so when the brothers are out, playing ball in the big giant field of a backyard, and then little 5-year-old toddler TJ Hockenson starts running around, he wants to play with the brothers. And he sort of credits that with the hands catching that ended up getting, the eye of recruiters and NFL scouts later in his career, because he's just been playing catching football since he was 5. But I would say the first person, or he would say, I guess, that the first person to really pick out that maybe TJ Hockenson is like, this is more than a game. Maybe this might be something special. This could actually be something with a future, was his granddad. Max Cameron is his name. The boys who go to their grandparents' place every summer, fish, golf, play sports, play around all the time. But he ended up getting really, really close with his grandfather. The grandparents would drive up to watch his games in high school. Eventually, they all moved into the same neighborhood, and TJ would go over to the Camerons and have lunch every day and get closer to his grandfather. It was really part of this support system. And I guess the takeaway here is TJ Hockenson, big time family man. A lot of players say, family man, but you can see that the sense of community and support is very important here and very defining to like who he is. But it also gives a sense of competition, right? Like I said, little brother syndrome, a little bit eager to prove yourself, right? So there's this anecdote in a Detroit Free Press article. If I remember, I'll link it in the show notes, and if I don't, yell at me. But one Christmas, the Hockenson family gets a pool table, and they have a little family pool tournament, and TJ Hockenson gets knocked out, and he's really mad about it. So at this point, I think the brothers were in college, and he wasn't yet. So they go away, and he doesn't see his brother for like 2 months. 2 months later, brother comes back, and and TJ Hockenson has a $10 bill and says, "Come play me in pool." And the big brother's like, "Come on, I'm not going to just like torch you in this game. I've been torching you in games my whole life. I'm not going to take your money for it." TJ Hockenson says, no, I insist. Let's go play some pool. All right, we'll go play pool. They go downstairs. TJ Hockenson sets up, breaks, makes it one on the break, and then clears the table. The game is over before his brother even can pick up a cue. Never gets a turn. And as an avid billiards player myself, I know how hard that is. That is the kind of competitive energy that you get with somebody when you grow up with two brothers a decade or plus older than you. And look, then he grew up big. So how about a really competitive work ethic, great hands, and a big guy? Iowa's calling. The Hawkeyes felt a disturbance in the force. And he grows up in Iowa. Couldn't be more of a Hawkeye. He was also a good basketball player and a very, very good high school football player. All-time leader in TDs and receptions. So he goes to Iowa, and there's this one great anecdote from George Kittle, who was, I think, a senior there in his last year at Iowa, before he declared for the draft, when these two new tight ends come in at summer workouts, Hockenson and Noah Fant. You remember those two guys kind of came up together in Iowa. But Kittle remembers watching, and these two are good friends. They've done like commercials together now and stuff. And he remembers seeing a summer workout, which is like the first exposure you get to these kids. And TJ Hockenson just like mosses a guy. And he's like, "Oh man, I'm glad I'm graduating. I think this dude would have taken my job." Could have totally changed things for George Kittle, who was like a 5th round draft pick. It was not a highly touted, didn't have a lot of draft stock before he kind of exploded as the superstar he is today. Funny little NFLs, right? But the Hawkeyes have all these great years. Go listen to Locked On Hawkeyes for more reminiscing for that if you want. But they have all these great years with Noah Fant and TJ Hockenson together as these like two dynamic tight ends, and they both end up as first rounders. So fast forward to the 2019 draft, the green room. TJ Hockenson is there with like all of his friends and family, and pick one, it's Kyler Murray. Pick two, Nick Bosa. Pick three, Quinnen Williams. If you remember, that was kind of everybody expected that to happen, right? So we're getting down to the point where, okay, now TJ Hockenson can think, oh, maybe this is now where I start to get nervous about, is my name going to get called or not? Is the phone going to go off or not? And he gets too nervous. So he's got to get up from the table. He's talking to his brothers and his friends, and he's like just trying to like get his mind off of things. And his back is to the table. So he doesn't see that his phone lights up. And his brother has to be like, dude, phone. And he picks it up, and it's the Lions. He gets to be a Lion. And he goes 8th overall, right? But with going 8th overall comes a certain sense of notoriety, right? When you are a top 10 draft pick, everybody knows about you and is thinking about you. It's really funny to go look at like pictures of it where he is this like baby-faced, clean-shaven, short hair, and compare it to like the Ragnar Viking he looks like now. But there is this extra spotlight that comes, and that's never really been TJ Hockenson. He's never been the much of an attention seeker outside of whatever comes with the classic little brother syndrome. But that sort of uncomfortability is made a lot easier when you have the support system that TJ Hockenson has. And when I see like interviews of his and profiles on him and stuff where he really opens up a little more than what you'll get on the sideline at OTAs, you see this great appreciation for his brothers who helped talk him through stuff, and his parents and his grandfather, his little sister who helps a lot with like his publicity and like emails and stuff. You get this sense of community and this sense of like valuing community, that he understands and really appreciates the communities in his life, whether it's his family, whether it's Hawkeye fans. He loved how fervent Hawkeye fans were when he was in college, and he kind of got the same thing from Lions fans for a long time when he was when he was playing there, and during a time when the Lions were really tearing a lot down, right? This is when they were trading away guys, Matt Stafford and all that stuff. The roster's deteriorating, and the team is struggling so much, and these fans have been through so much, but look at how much they still support me. That really is important to him. And I think there's this longing for it that I'm sure he still carries with him, and he hasn't been here that long now, but I'm sure he carries that desire for a sense of community. So if you want to show TJ Hockenson some love, the easiest thing is to support the Vikings. I hope that that's not too much to ask of you, ostensibly a Vikings fan, because you're listening to Locked On Vikings. And you can listen to Locked On Vikings again tomorrow if you so prefer. Maybe I'll talk Jaren Hall a little bit. Maybe I will talk about something else. I got a couple of other interesting experimental things in the work, but whatever they are, we'll get through what is left of May together, and then we get into the true dead period of June. Should be fun. I will see you guys. We're still doing shows every day through June, by the way. Monday through Friday, baby. We don't sleep here at Locked On Vikings. So come be an insomniac freak with me. And as always, Skull.